Okay. Hi, this is Scott Silverman, and I'm here today with noted ancient astrologer, and I mean an astrologer who does ancient astrology, Demetra George, and she's going to talk a little bit about her upcoming weekend in South Florida when the South Florida Astrological Association presents a weekend with Demetra George. And she's kind enough to answer some questions for you, the prospective attendees of this event. Hello, Demetra. How are you?
Hi, Scott. It's so fun being with you again.
Well, I want you to know we're all looking forward to your coming down and being once again a featured speaker at the South Florida Astrological
I
Association.
know. I so look forward to it myself. I think I began coming probably in the late 1990s. So it'll be 20 years now that I've been making visits to South Florida. And it's a group that is so close to my heart and filled with like the very best of memories.
Fantastic. So we'll celebrate our 20th anniversary with you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll cut away to some question and answer slides, although you've already answered one of the questions. So thank you in the interest of saving time. So let's see. All right. It wouldn't be a PowerPoint presentation if we didn't take a moment to have a problem sharing stuff. All right. Here we are, I believe, on the screen. And again, it's South Florida. Welcomes Demetra George. The event will be taking place. Oh, come on. February 7th and 8th of 2020 at the Hyatt Place Hotel in Dania Beach, Florida, which is right on the outskirts of Fort Lauderdale. It's a wonderful hotel. There are great restaurants within walking distance. And for those of you who absolutely must shop, some big box stores. And we'll be returning to this slide at the end. So there is a discount if you prepay before you arrive at the door. And now here's our little Q&A. Question one, Demetra, where and when were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, on July 25th, 1946.
And do you use a rectified birth time or do you use the time from your birth chart?
I use the time for my birth certificate. That is 6:22 a.m.
Thank you. Well, we know that you've been coming now for 20 years. We can skip that one. And I know that it was both Brenda Brush and Ralph.
Ralph Cannizzaro were my very first hosts.
Exactly. And we're grateful to them for initiating this relationship.
Right. And I think it was, they asked me to talk about asteroid goddesses the very first time I was there. So
how propitious, right?
The maturation of that thinking 20 years later.
And for those of you watching this little recording, Demetra is going to be speaking on Saturday about Asteroid Goddesses 2020. You're going to be the first audience that gets to hear new and updated material on the asteroid goddesses. So be ready. How long have you been a practicing astrologer?
I could say, Scott, that this talk is in celebration of the 100th centennial of the 19th Amendment and women's right to vote. So it's how the asteroid goddesses have been influential voices of the feminine since the beginning of the women's movement, and who is still speaking their concerns today.
Fantastic. And for those of you who are wondering which asteroid goddesses Demetra is talking about, it's the first four. Would you like to name them for me, Demetra?
Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta, the first four asteroids discovered.
Yes, fantastic. All right, I'll ask this question again, but I think I'll let you read it on the screen.
For how long have I been a practicing astrologer? Well, I taught myself how to cast a chart in the summer of 1971. And shortly thereafter, I began reading pieces of charts for my friends. So when I realized I was a professional astrologer, I'm not exactly sure. But I do have this beautiful watercolor sign that says astrological charts, $10, $7, and with comments, $10 that I had made. That was circa 1977 would be my guess.
Wow. Now, of course, your prices have gone up a
Well,
little.
that's something else.
What do you remember about the first astrology reading that you received?
Well, I was in college. I think I must have been a sophomore. And there are a few upperclassmen who were, and I was going to school at New Paltz, a state university about 100 miles north of New York City. And there were several upperclassmen who were driving to New York City once a week to take astrology lessons, which I thought was the most exotic thing I'd ever heard. And in the course of that, it was mentioned that there was a local astrologer in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I remember like taking the bus from New Paltz to Poughkeepsie and walking along these streets with this little address clutched in my hand. And a lovely older woman welcomed me into her Victorian parlor and gave a reading. Of course, I didn't have the correct birth time at that time, but it was a seminal experience.
And even with the incorrect birth time, did she hit her? Did she make some?
Frankly, I don't remember anything she told me.
Wait, where's the cassette tape, right?
Yeah. That was pre-cassette tape.
Oh my goodness. Who was your first astrology teacher and how old were you when you began your astrological studies? Well, I guess you were in your 20s.
I was in my 20s. I must have been 24, 25. And I taught myself out of Llewellyn George's ABC horoscope maker and delineator how to cast a chart. And then I heard about the correspondence course that the Oceanside Rosicrucians offered. So it was Sister Claire from there who was my first astrology teacher. And they would send me lessons and I would do them and send them back and then get corrections and comments. But my first live astrology teacher was Virginia Dayan from the Portland Astrology Center. And that was in the summer of 1974.
I think I've been to the Rosicrucian Centers in California.
In Oceanside. There's one in San Jose, but this is the one in Oceanside that's near San Diego.
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
What, in your humble opinion, is the most outstanding feature in your birth chart?
I would say the fact that my moon is conjunct the asteroid Uranus, and that gives me a sort of free-spirited, always interested and out there on the edges of everything. But my sun is conjunct Saturn, and that's the incredible self-discipline and hard work and conscientiousness that also characterizes me. So it's a mediating between Saturn and Uranus in my life.
Wow. Will you be sharing your chart with conference attendees? Actually, it's on the internet.
If they're interested, they're welcome to look at it.
What ascendant is the correct ascendant for your chart, by the way?
21 Leo.
Okay. I believe
I have the Chicago birth time that even though daylight was in effect, the birth time was recorded in standard time.
So any chart that does not have 21 Leo as your ascendant is an incorrect chart.
That's right.
What is your preferred house system when casting or reading an astrological chart?
Well, now, of course, whole sign houses for the last 20 years. And often people ask me, why did I switch from Placidus and Koch and Alcabitzius and all the other house systems to whole sign? And the real reason is because Rob Hand told me to.
That might be why I use Placidus. Did you ever flirt with using equal houses?
Not equal houses, but I had, before the Hellenistic traditional revival, had worked with both Koch and Placidus.
I know for a while you were teaching your students to use porphyry houses. Do you still?
Oh, and porphyry as an adjunct in the Hellenistic material.
Did I skip one? Yes. Do you use ancient or modern zodiacal rulerships per signs and planets?
Of course, I use the ancient rulerships of Jupiter for Pisces and Saturn for Aquarius and Mars for Scorpio. However, I continue to use the outer planets in the chart. And actually, I use not only the 4 asteroids, but I scan most of the charts that I read for clients from a list of another 500 asteroids. So it isn't as if I don't use many celestial bodies, but in terms of planets ruling houses, I stay with the 7 visible planets.
Okay, thank you. There are personal name asteroids for both your first name, Demetra, aka Demeter, and last name, George. Are there any anecdotes of minor planet Demeter asserting its primacy in your chart?
Yes, in a very poignant way. When I was born, my mother named me Margarita after her mother. Then, when it came time for me to be baptized into the Greek Orthodox religion, my godmother refused to baptize me with that name, and she insisted that my name be Demetra after my paternal grandmother. And it turns out that the asteroid Demeter is conjunct Saturn in my chart, which is, of course, the paternal principle, and a wide conjunction to my sun in early Leo. So there it is.
Well, now I'm going to keep asking you some questions, but we're going to run out of the questions on slides. So I hope visual learners won't be too disappointed. Wait, we have one more, I believe. Yes. Many astrologers have a favorite teaching chart that exemplify a particular technique. I know that generations of Kepler students are required to analyze the horoscopes of Jackie Kennedy, Frida Kahlo, and Madonna. Have you had to retire any of these from overuse? Can you even bear to look at these charts anymore?
Yes, I'm totally still fascinated by the chart of Jackie Kennedy and Frida Kahlo. I've used Jackie Kennedy's chart in the Ancient Astrology books, Volume 1 that was published this year and Volume 2 that will be out in several months. And
by Rubedo Press, I believe?
Yes, Rubedo Press out of New Zealand. And you should pay attention. If you're on my email list for my website, demetrageorge.com, you'll receive advanced notification of its publication. And I've used Frida Kahlo in the Time Lords retreat that I've been doing out of Oregon over these past few years. In my new book, I have looked at some of the ancient rulers of the chart and their connection with length of life techniques. And Jackie Kennedy's chart continues to be such a beautiful chart that exemplifies the principles so clearly. It's really an archetypal chart and an archetypal life. So that's still very close to my heart. And I haven't tired of them. However, in all the new presentations I'm doing, I'm continuing to use different charts.
And let me ask you, did Marcia Moore's early book on Jackie Kennedy and her analysis of Jackie's horoscope inspire you or did you find it later?
I was aware of my desire to use Jackie's life before I knew that that book existed. And I have to say that I've not ever seen that book. I keep forgetting that it was written. So if you have it in your library, when I come down next week, I would love to leaf through it.
I'm saving you a copy of it, actually.
Okay.
All right. All right. Robert Zoller just passed away. What influence, and he'll be terribly missed by our global astrological community, and what influence did Robert Zoller have on your astrological practice?
Well, in retrospect, he was actually my first impetus to study traditional and ancient astrology. And the story goes back to a conference in the early mid-90s. I'm tending to think it was circa 1994 when I gave a talk on the asteroid goddesses that he happened to be walking by the room and heard a little bit of it in the hallway. And after I came out, he asked me if I had ever read Claudius Ptolemy's book, The Tetrabiblos. And when I admitted I hadn't, with a sort of like open mouth shock expression, like, who? He began screaming at me that how could anyone, like especially me, call myself a self-respecting astrologer if I had not read Ptolemy. So the vehemence of his chastisement was so strong that was the motivation to actually pick up a copy of that book. And that, in hindsight, was just coalescing at that point, Project Hindsight. So those were the influences that landed me in the traditional astrology movement.
How about the noted astrohistorian James Herschel Holden? And we were both fortunate enough to see James Holden and Robert Zoller present at an Amsterdam conference.
Yes, and James was like really one of the greats. He was translating the ancient astrologers as early as the 1950s, almost half a century before Project Hindsight got into it. But he was doing it as a hobby, and almost all of his translations remained in boxes in his garage until shortly before his death, when the AFA began to publish them. And Scott, I remember a funny story when we were still at Kepler College, when you heard the rumor that Holden had a translation of Rhetorius in his garage. Frantic with thinking of how could you break into that garage to get your hands on the translation.
But we didn't have to, yeah.
Right, we didn't have to. And the AFA graciously published it. But James Holden was really a genius of our times. And he told the story, how did he get into astrology? That he lived in a small town in South Texas, and every week his mother went to the beauty parlor and he had to sit there and wait, and there were like the popular astrology magazines on the coffee table, and that was his introduction to the art that would allow us to reclaim so much of our heritage and the future.
Wow, that would have been amazing to have known him back then. On the same note, let me ask you, how important do you think it is that students of ancient astrology actually learn a classical language, such as Greek or Latin, or Arabic, Persian, or Sanskrit? You have done your own original translation work, of course. Do you think the act of translating alters and enhances one's understanding of ancient texts?
There's no question about it. But the reality of a significant portion of the astrological community actually being able to take the time to learn the ancient languages is quite slight. But I would say that whatever one can learn of ancient astrology, that the knowledge of the original language in which the text was written would advance and enhance your comprehension by 90%.
So you're in favor?
I'm definitely in favor, and I also realize the relative likelihood of that actually coming to pass, because it's an incredible commitment of many, many years of focused and concentrated study.
Which astrological authors continue to inspire you?
Well, to the extent that the last 20 years I've been immersed in the ancient astrologers, I continue to find Valens to be a gold mine, and there's so much in Firmicus Maternus. My pushing into the medieval astrology has led me to Abu Mashar and Guido Bonatti, and even Ibn Ezra. I spent a period of time reading that out loud with one of my students, Johnny Nicholas, and we'd read a few sentences aloud, and then we'd pause, and it's like, okay, do we know what he said? And we discuss it. And Ibn Ezra was amazing in his transmission of much of the material of the Arabic astrologers. And he wrote in Hebrew, and we have Myra Epstein to thank for giving us an English translation of his
That
work.
was my next question, as there are a couple of editions translated. Yeah. What current mundane celestial, let me say that again. What current mundane celestial configurations are you keeping an eye on?
I think to a certain extent, many of us astrologers are looking at President Trump's chart in view of the current Saturn-Pluto opposition to his natal Saturn. But within that, one of the ancient timing techniques of zodiacal releasing, and particularly the loosing of the bond, has me quite fascinated. And last year, there were 4 nested loosing of the bonds around his planet Saturn. That term comes from ancient Roman religion, where the cult statue of Saturn had a rope tied around its feet most of the year. But once a year on Saturnalia, they took the rope off. That was called the loosing of the bond, and it was 5 days of lawlessness, where there were reversals in the ordinary nature of things. And that the 4th nested loosing of the bond happened last summer between July 24th and July 27th. And when those days came around, like, I was listening to the TV and reading the newspapers, and there wasn't anything totally extraordinary that I saw about that, although there was always something going on. But then in retrospect, it was July 25th that happened to be my birthday. That was the infamous phone call with the Ukrainian President Zelensky. So that loosening of the bond technique, like, totally isolated the pivotal importance of that particular day. There's another series of shifts that happen in his chart coming up in the second part of March. One longer cycle shifts, I think, March 17th. And then I think it's March 27th, 28th, that there's another loosening of the bond. So I'm waiting to see what that is. But just last night I heard that that was the predicted publication date of John Bolton's book. So I don't know how that is going to actually play into the whole scenario.
So we know something will happen, but we're not.
Something, and we may not see it on that day, but it's a day that those few days are a day that we should keep in our mind as future events unfold.
What advice would you give to new astrologers?
My advice to new astrologers would be to thoroughly learn the meanings of the planet signs, houses, and aspects. And to be able to feel confident in making simple interpretive sentences on your own before you start reading charts for others as a professional service. Now, there's nothing like trying to interpret someone's chart to accelerate your own learning process, but that should be done within the context of, I'm a student trying to learn, and would you be willing to let me try something out on you? And there's a gap between that and I'm hanging out my shingle as a professional astrologer and reading your chart.
Well, thank you, Demetra. Is there anything that attendees of this weekend workshop need to do to prepare for your lecture?
Oh, well, I would ask them two things. One is to put the 4 major asteroids in your chart. And of course, people always want to know, like, how does this impact my own life? How do I respond to that? And it's quite simple now to get those positions, not only from books, but by going online, and astro.com will give you charts with the asteroid positions. And then I'll be doing a whole set on the houses, on their joys, their strengths, their secret, esoteric spiritual meanings from the ancient tradition. And to the extent that I use whole sign houses, it would be interesting, useful for people to also have their chart in the whole sign house system. And ultimately, of course, people can use whatever house system they want. But when they're opening their minds to the ancient astrology of working within the house system that was used, helps bring things more into focus. So to have a copy of that alongside the one you usually use, and then you can do a comparison in real time.
Now, no one will be selling your books at the weekend workshop.
Oh, no, they will be sold. Copies of Ancient Astrology are arriving on the very doorstep, so to speak. And Yvonne Paglia from Ibis Press is attending, and she's bringing copies of Asteroid Goddesses, Astrology for Yourself, and Astrology on the Authentic Self. And Ellen will have a whole table set up, and there'll be a book signing event happening somewhere within the course of the weekend.
Fantastic. So you'll be starting your discussion of the houses on Saturday afternoon.
Saturday afternoon and continuing into Sunday.
Fantastic. Well, I know we can't wait for you to get here. And I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to have this conversation with me that I hope people will actually get a chance to see. And
right. It's always a pleasure speaking with you, Scott. And I'm just so excited to be returning to all of my old friends in South Florida. And I know there are many new members of the organization that I'm anxious to meet and connect with.
There are a lot of new members. And guess what? A lot of them are those Uranus-Neptune conjunction children of the early 90s. So, and they love astrology. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop this recording, but don't you go away for one moment.